Ashley, you're on mute.
I guess I was on mute. I thought I clicked it off, but I did not. So I will start that welcome over again. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to day 4 of IIUSA's virtual EB-5 industry forum. This is our EB-5 legislative updates panel, where we are and where we're going. We have a great panel ahead of us. I know a lot of you have questions that you've been asking throughout the conference, and we're really excited to give you an update here on what IIUSA has been up to over the last couple of months and progress towards reauthorization. Before we get started, I just want to run through a couple of quick housekeeping items. First and foremost, this webinar is intended for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. You should always consult your own legal counsel with any questions or concerns on this topic, and all of the information in this webinar is deemed to be accurate and up to date as of the recording. Additionally, all of our participants are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions for our panelists, you can use the Q&A function that you see there indicated on your screen with the yellow arrow. We will try to get to as many questions as we can throughout this session. We are expecting quite a few questions and we only have an hour, so apologize in advance if we can't get to all of them, but hopefully we will find a way to answer any questions that we're unable to get to. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce IIUSA's Executive Director, Aaron Grau, who will be your moderator for this panel, and he will introduce the rest of the panelists. Aaron?
Thanks, Ashley. I appreciate it. Welcome to all of you who are joining us. You know, the gentlemen who are on today's panel have not only my colleagues, but have become my friends. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, lest I run on and on about how wonderful they are. So I'm just going to go in order of the folks that I see on the screen and just ask you to say a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move into the heart of the matter. So Rush, would you mind?
Not at all. Thank you, Aaron. I'm Rush Deacon, Managing Director of Pine State Regional Center, and also Chief Executive Officer of Arkansas Capital Corporation, which is the parent company of our regional center. It's a private nonprofit, an NGO, if you will, that's been around for more than 60 years, doing special purpose finance for economic development purposes. And we continue to do that in the EB-5 space with our Pine State Regional Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Rush. Bill?
Thanks, Aaron. I'm Bill Gresser. I'm the president and a founder of EB-5 New York State. We founded the company back in 2007, and we've helped numerous investors and their families with everything from the starting of the process through their unconditional green card and 829 approval and their full repayment of their investment. In addition to that, I am proud to be the vice president of IIUSA, and I'm a member of the board as a result. So I'm looking forward to the panel, and thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Bill. Steve?
Steve Stranicia, I'm the CEO of Cleveland International Fund. We cover the Cleveland area, but other parts of Ohio. We've been involved in EB-5 since 2010. Have done approximately $300 million of EB-5, so close to 600 investors we've been involved with, some that we are still managing as we help them through this process. I've been an officer of IIUSA for the last, I think, 3 years as treasurer. Before that, I also was chairman for a year of the Public Policy Committee, and I've enjoyed working with my colleagues that are on this panel.
Thanks, Steve. George?
Good morning, George Mackley with Commonwealth Strategic Partners, co-founder and managing partner. We are IIUSA's partner on Capitol Hill and working with their advocacy plan and getting the reauthorization. Thank you.
Thanks, George. And last but not least, our chairman of the board and president, Bob, would you be so kind?
Yeah, I'm pleased to. Thanks, Aaron. I'm Bob Kraft. I'm the chairman, CEO, and founder of First Pathway Partners. We're headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We operate in the state of Wisconsin, Illinois, and in California. We've been involved with a couple $1 billion worth of development projects for EB-5. I've been a member of IIUSA since 2007 when the company was founded, and a member of the board for 9 years, I guess, and president of IIUSA for the last 5 years, and looking forward to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. So let's jump into the meat of the matter. The title of today's webinar is Where We Are and Where We're Going. And as I discussed the topic with the panelists and others, it made sense for us to actually begin a little bit further back where we were in order to provide a full context and understanding of where we are and where we're going. I'm not going to dwell on this particular slide. We're going to get into the details of each one of these points along the timeline that our reauthorization effort has taken. But you can see that it really begins all the way back in the summer of 2020 with several major milestones along the way, some good, some not so good. And I think that as we push through some of the details, I think everybody will have a clearer picture of why we are where we are, and then obviously a discussion of where we're going. So let's move on. So if we start at the very beginning, summer of 2020, and what happened after that, you can see that one of the things that started this whole process off, at least insofar as our initial status, was that IIUSA was invited by Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy to help negotiate and develop an EB-5 regional center reauthorization bill. You can see there, what happened next, who was involved. We were seeking a 5-year reauthorization, and pursuant to Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy's desires, we had an intense focus on the reauthorization itself and then integrity measures. At the same time, we saw a lot of IIUSA's advocacy work develop in the grassroots, the establishment and furthering of the coalition to save and create jobs. So let me turn to the panelists with that bit of background and ask you for some of your insights with regards to this time in our timeline. Bill, I'd like to start with you. With regards to Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy's office, what are or what were your perspectives or opinions about the negotiations that started to take place in the summer of 2020 with those offices?
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah. So IIUSA and its board were invited by the Grassley and Leahy offices to participate in negotiations, to begin discussions around bills which the industry and members of Congress, many members, had been working on for years. And it was the general consensus that we had gotten very close on a number of instances in the past to major reform of the program, but then those didn't work for one reason or another. So when Senators Grassley and Leahy invited IIUSA to begin further discussions in the summer of 2020, their focus was entirely on integrity and longer-term reauthorization of the EB-5 program. So you asked, what was my impression? What was our impression of those discussions? Senators Grassley and Leahy's offices come from slightly different perspectives, but they are very knowledgeable. And you have on the slide Drew Robinson from Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy's office, Raj Venkatamaran, they were very open, they were very honest, they were very knowledgeable. And I think it also makes sense to add into that Dave Pendle. So Dave has been working in the EB-5 space for many years. And then he retired, and his work was carried on by Raj, who also is very knowledgeable, very experienced, and also got a lot of the history from Dave Pendle. I felt that the negotiation was there was a lot of integrity to the negotiations about integrity. And the staff in Leahy and Grassley's offices were willing to make compromises on integrity, which we hadn't really seen before, and which I think were very important for industry to make sure that the integrity reforms which are passed are also workable for investors and are workable for industry. And I also think it's important to note that their real focus was on integrity and reauthorization without any other issues. I guess the other thing that's important is that the board of IIUSA was involved and integral in the back and forth in the negotiations. And I really think that we also should give a shout out to Carolyn Lee and Adam Green for all of their work that they put into that process. So it was a very open process, and our board was involved, and they were honest, and there was a lot of compromise given. So that's how I would look at it, Aaron.
I agree with you 100%, especially with the shout outs to Carolyn and Adam, whose diligence and careful eye were invaluable. And from those negotiations, we came up with S-831. It was a bill that was introduced in the Senate, finally. And Rush, I was wondering, let me turn to you for a minute. Your impressions on the bill itself. What did you take away from it? What were its strengths? What were its weaknesses? Because I think if we understand that, we can set the stage for where we're going when we get there down in a few minutes.
Well, the strength was obviously a long-term reauthorization. That's something we've been looking for a long time, and it had a 5-year reauthorization as part of the bill. And then integrity, which basically everyone in the industry recognizes the need for integrity to kind of clean up the black eye that the program has received from the very, very small number of bad actors in the past. So it had those two things that were part of the bill. And quite frankly, those who expressed some hesitation on the bill, as they said, it's not so much what's in it, but what's not in it. So that kind of carries us forward to a slide later on.
Okay. So a few more minutes on this slide. I mean, we're talking about, we also mentioned that during this time frame, IIUSA's advocacy picked up from a few different perspectives, grassroots, as well as what I call shoe leather up on Capitol Hill. Let me turn to you, George, for just a moment with regards to the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs. This was a suggestion that your firm brought to the table. It turned out to be incredibly insightful and beneficial. Can you give us a little bit of a picture as to why it was important for us? Who is a member of the coalition? Just a quick snapshot, because it's not as if the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs has dissipated.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, for bringing that up. I think the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs really was an effort by us to make sure that us reaching out to whether it's national organizations or local organizations from around the country to make them aware of the impact EB-5 has on their local communities. And so I think for us, we actually kind of ranged anywhere from your mayors, your local elected officials, your local chambers of commerce, who actually had a firsthand knowledge of the benefit of EB-5 and the investment, whether it's through economic dollars, but then also the economic impact from job creation and what that does for the local communities. So if they understood that the impending expiration of the program was coming, that they would engage and actually help us to promote the reauthorization of the program. And we did that. And so we worked and connected with organizations around the country and local mayor offices, and through the help of our EB-5 with the IIUSA members, we're able to really generate a lot of support for that program. This really did help us in turn with Bill and our outreach to making sure that not just that we had S-831, but we also had a House companion in HR 2901, and with Congressman Stanton from Arizona and Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania introducing that bill, and then generating what now is 30 members, sponsors and co-sponsors to the HR 2901, so the House bill. So all that really kind of lends into each other, saying, one, we want to show local support, but then that also helps us not only with our House members, but then also our efforts even in the Senate.
And that's the shoe leather that I was talking about. And so before we leave this slide, Bill, I think you wanted to say offer a few insights on what that actually means. I mean, the concept of shoe leather and what IIUSA was doing from an advocacy perspective on Capitol Hill. Bill?
Sure. I would say that what IIUSA was doing is we were leading with George and you, Aaron, an effort to get more co-sponsors, more support for S-831 and then 2901 on the House side. And our members were very active in contacting their members of Congress, especially with George's insight as to the members that were important to contact. As a result of that, as George said, we've got a lot of co-sponsors on 2901, which wouldn't have happened ordinarily, but for the activities of our members, for people getting out there, picking up the phone and saying, this is why this bill is important. But it's also picking up the phone and saying, why is IIUSA important? Why is the industry important? Why is EB-5 important for this community? And it's surprisingly not that difficult. And I know we talk about it on future slides, so I won't go into it too much, but I would just say it was our efforts as an association to really get a lot of those members of Congress to support these bills. So
thank you, and I appreciate it. Let's jump to the next slide. So summer 2020 and then December 2020, we had a bill introduced in the Senate. We had the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs. We had extensive, as we've called it, shoe leather. Rush, what happened? What happened December 2020?
Well, I think it's important to understand what happened December 2020 to understand what has happened and is happening in 2021. And as probably everyone listening in today knows, we've been through a series of reauthorizations over the last several years, always as part of a spending bill. Whether it's a continuing resolution or an omnibus spending bill, we've always had reauthorization through those vehicles, which is held us captive to however long those spending bills were valid, which could be 2 weeks, 2 months, or even something less than a full year. So we've had like over a dozen reauthorizations over the years. What's different in 2020 is right before Christmas of last year, there was an omnibus spending bill. And what they put on that bill was a reauthorization of the program. The omnibus spending bill went through the end of the fiscal year, which was September 30 of 2021. But the regional center program was authorized through June 30 of 2021. So you had, for the first time in many years, a decoupling of our reauthorization cycle with the spending bill cycle. So I think that's an important setup to what's happened in 2021.
I appreciate it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, if we don't take this into consideration, if we don't study where we've been, we're not going to know where we're going. And just before we leave this slide, I'm curious, I don't mean to put you on the spot yet, Steve, but any takes on the events of that decoupling, any additional perspectives?
Well, I think starting at that point and obviously continuing right up to the present, for those observing the EB-5 program, obviously we ourselves running regional centers, but more importantly, the investors. I think it got everybody's antennae up in terms of what does this mean? Will there be a resolution? There was a lot of concern that the decoupling would, lead to some bad results. And I think in one sense, the fact that the program's lapsed has, would, for those who hold that view, would say that's not a good result. And I'm certainly not suggesting that's a good result so far, but I think as we're going to get to here, the story is not over yet. I think it was an intention for the broad group of people who support EB-5, but supported it in different kinds of ways. And I'm speaking about our congressional support, whether it's from Grassley and Leahy or whether it's from others, that they wanted to bring this to a head. And in doing this, it sort of forced the discussions, which you're going to continue to talk about, and forced the issues so that we could get to a final resolution. The goal was obviously to do that by June 30th. And you're going to mention how close we got with that. And I think our hope is obviously that while that didn't occur on June 30th, that it'll occur shortly. And George could speak to this more, but Congress would say, well, that's sort of the way a lot of things happen in this world in Congress, is it takes a couple times once you're really serious to get something done. So, but we've certainly, and as a regional center operator, we've certainly had to stay in even closer contact with our investors and to give them the broad perspective of overall support, and that this could ultimately lead to a longer term authorization. I'm pleased from our end that we've gotten good response and patience from our investors, even while there's some anxiety with that. While we're pressing them on their patience, I think it's been positive that overall the industry is stayed united, and I mean not just the regional centers, but the investors in hanging in there.
I want to pick up on one point and then move to the next slide. You mentioned investors, and I think you're absolutely right. It's been my perspective for a long time now that this EB-5 industry is less an industry and more of an ecosystem. And the more we lift each other up, the better off this whole system will do, meaning protection for investors as well as their perspectives, in addition to everything that IIUSA does for regional centers. So I appreciate you bringing it up. I know it wasn't exactly on point with what I'm saying isn't exactly on point with regards to the decoupling, but it's an important note. Let's move on to the next slide.
Aaron, could I, I just want to add on there. There was another thing that was going on concurrent with the 2020 extension to June 30th with the bill, and that was the regulations that were introduced at the end of November.
Yeah. Which
was driven by some of the principal offices that were pushing hard and wanted integrity reforms and some other changes. USCIS issued the regulations, which increased the minimum amount, which was something those offices felt was important, but also it addressed the TEA definitions to tighten it up. So, there have been a lot of things that really kind of forced us to where we are right now, which is to hopefully end up with a much better bill that the industry has coalesced around and we can all get behind. But it's been messy for sure. It's been upsetting for everybody. But I think it's brought us to a point where we're going to get something done that'll be better for the industry long term.
I agree. Let's jump to the next slide, but I'd like to stay with you, Bob. The next slide focuses on spring 2021 and really the bicameralism that the EB-5 Regional Center program attention that it received. And I'm just curious from your perspective, it's such an obvious and simple concept, bicameralism, House and Senate, but why is it so meaningful in our story to you?
Well, I think it's very important. It's very meaningful because the objection to the program really is around some aspects of the bill that were not in the Grassley-Leahy bill from groups within the industry. In fact, IIUSA, as Rush said earlier, we supported the program, but we had many discussions about some of the things that were left out, which are now back in, which is actually better for the bill long term. But the program itself had support from both the Democratic and Republican side, both the House and the Senate. And we really felt very optimistic that it was going to get passed on June 30th. But I mean, what happened or prior to June 30th. So the program lapsed, but there's never really been any objection at all to the program and the good that it does for the country and the important role it plays in our economy and the important role it played after the financial collapse in 2008. So there's a recognition that it's a job creator. It's a good program. The people that invest in the country are the kind of people that we want to come into the country, making an investment in American jobs. So, I mean, I think everybody understands that, and it's not a matter of if, it's when we get this thing done and what the final form looks like. To me, it's very encouraging, and I've always been an optimist on the program, but I do think we're real close at this point.
Steve, to you real quick, to your recollection, has the EB-5 Regional Center program, its reauthorization, ever had a companion bill? In other words, have there ever been a standalone bill in the Senate and the House, from your recollection?
I don't recall that we have, particularly, obviously, ones that match each other.
Right.
I think obviously that's what you mean by companion. I think that there've been different attempts at legislation on both sides, if I really think back, but they dealt with EB-5 in different ways. So this was the first time, to your point about bicameralism, that there was identical bills on both sides, and in this case also being supported in a bipartisan way. So that was a major accomplishment of this period.
So last question on this slide, Rush, let me jump over to you. So we had two bills, one in the Senate, one in the House, each of them gaining traction because of grassroots initiatives and shoe leather. But I mean, at its core, we're talking about integrity of the bill. So from your perspective, when we reached out to members of the House and the Senate, what do you think integrity meant to them? I mean, what were they seeing in this that said, yeah, I'm going to support this?
Well, I mean, different to different members, obviously, and some would dive deeper into it and some would, latch on to just the word integrity, but it's obviously a buzzword that is important. But anybody that dove into it understood that this really was a good faith effort at bringing some sanity and integrity to the program, knowing that you could Google EB-5 and the bad news pops up before the good news. And so there was the feeling that there was the need for provisions that brought real sanity and integrity to the program. So everyone I visited with in my own delegation and elsewhere, integrity was the easy part of the bills that were out there, They're still there.
And Aaron, can I jump in on that as well, just for a sec?
Yes, please.
Sure. So, I think that Rush's point is integrity is important, but I think of just looking at your slide, Congressman Stanton, and he was a former mayor of Phoenix. And while he was a mayor, he saw the benefits of EB-5 in the Phoenix community. And he actually has met with investors and he has spoken with investors. He played ping pong with investors. I mean, he really honestly knows investors in this program. And when he was asked to consider being the sponsor of this legislation, he was very keen that improvements on integrity reforms were important, but he was also extremely keen on keeping this program going and keeping it going for the benefits to our country, as Bob said, and as we've all mentioned, the obligations I believe the U.S. has to the investors who were in the program. So integrity is important, but over the years we've seen tremendous support from both sides of Congress, from both parties in Congress, for the EB-5 program, for all it does for the country.
Thank you. And thanks while I'm here to Congressman Stanton and Congressman Fitzpatrick and all that they've done. Let's move to the next slide as we take our trip down memory lane in anticipation of discussing what comes next. We've had some really good things happen along the way and some not so good things happen along the way. On June 24th, the bill S-831 failed to pass the Senate during a unanimous consent effort. The timing was such that, if I recall, the Senate was going out on recess, and by the time they would have returned, it would have been after June 30th, which was the date at which the program sunset. So George, let me turn to you for just a moment, because this may be a bit of a technical question, but what is a unanimous consent protocol in the Senate? How does it work? And what made it different? What makes it different from, passing a bill 51 to 49 or 60 to 40? I mean, why was this so pivotal?
Great, thank you, Aaron. So I think to start this out to have a unanimous consent, what would happen is for this bill, the Republican and the Democratic sponsors, they're going to be there's a message that gets sent out essentially from them to all the members of their caucus, saying that they are intending to bring this bill up on the floor for unanimous consent. Does anyone have any objections, essentially? What that would do is then helps us to identify if there are any objections so that we can go speak to those offices to hopefully pull them back, so that it would allow this bill to come to the floor. It would be brought up for unanimous consent and then just be voted on by voice vote and then moved on under unanimous consent. During that process, we were able to identify a number of offices that did have concerns. In doing that, we were able to utilize our membership and also our relationships to talk to those offices to bring them and say, okay, what are your concerns and how can we address them? We did address them, and we were walking into that essentially that day, at that point, thinking that we were going to have a unanimous consent. It wasn't until that last moment that we were told about 15, 30 minutes before the unanimous consent request would happen, is that Senator Graham was going to object. He did object on the floor. There are times where someone would object on the floor and they give reasons for objecting. Unfortunately, we did not have a reason. He objected, walked off the floor, and then at that point, that's the objection that's needed to stop the unanimous consent. And that's where we kind of then had to go back to, okay, well, now we know that June 30th, that the program would sunset.
So I have a couple follow-up questions for you. I don't know if you'll have answers to them. So Senator Graham was the lone objector. Therefore, eliminating unanimity, right? Because there was one person who did object. Are Senator Graham's concerns being met? I mean, what is IIUSA? What is the industry doing to work with Senator Graham to address his concerns? Any insight on that?
I mean, I think they're definitely being concerned. I think we have now what's been coming is that the industry coming together to really develop some language that would not only address his concerns, but maybe some of those that reached out to him. We do believe that the industry is united behind what we've been working on consistently for the past few months, and we hope that they would be addressed. We have heard that Senator Graham is interested in seeing something get done, so this is an opportunity for him to now sort of voice his support.
Yeah, we are anxious to work with the senator's office, and obviously looking forward to doing so. And hopefully we can address those concerns. But one more quick question for you. The next time reauthorization comes up for a vote, are we going to face the same hurdle? Are we going to face the same unanimous consent hurdle where one senator would be able to stop the reauthorization?
No, what we've been working toward is language that would be included. I know we talked about the decoupling of the program from the appropriations process, but what we're working to is actually to make sure that the language, which would be the reauthorization for say 10 years, would be included in a must-pass piece of legislation, which is a funding bill. So we are working toward that. In doing so, we don't see the same threats as, since it was a standalone bill, of someone coming up and just stopping the whole process of an appropriations or continuing resolution or the funding bill that now would expire on December 3rd, for them standing up and stopping the whole thing because of EB-5. We don't see that as really a realistic approach by any member of the Senate. So we do think if we can get it in there, we will see success in getting it passed. So no, we don't see the same threat of a unanimous consent and having one person object to EB-5 language.
Okay. So before we leave this slide, a couple more things to touch base on. Bob, I'd like to turn to you for a moment. So on June 30th, 2021, the program sunsets. And I've heard a lot of words applied to this particular event. A sunset, a lapse, termination. You sit atop IIUSA. From your perspective, what does a sunset mean? What did the sunset mean for the program, and how has IIUSA sort of tackled that reality, sort of amorphous reality of a sunset, and what has happened to the EB-5 Regional Center program?
Well, I mean, it wasn't good. I mean, I think it certainly sent shockwaves through the industry, and we, all of us in the industry, have worked so hard to get a program in place that address the concerns of Senator Grassley and Leahy. We were very disappointed. We thought we were right there. That being said, we quickly dusted ourselves off and understand that in the past, the program has sunset or lapsed before. It was actually suspended back in the 90s. So, there's never been a sense that there wasn't support for the program or an understanding the important role the program plays in our economy. It's a great program, and but it can be made better. So I think after we got over the shock of it, we all recommitted to, okay, this is disappointing. It's a setback. So, where do we go now? And again, we began having serious discussions with those offices, the principal offices, which really are Senator Leahy and Grassley. They were disappointed. They are very committed to getting the program passed. They've probably worked harder than anybody and know the program better than anybody, in Congress, and have been really good advocates for the program and the benefits of it. But they felt very strongly about things that needed to be done. We believe that the main points that they were pushing for are part of the new bill, which is being finalized now. And the program has been improved a little bit around the edges. Some of the things that actually IIUSA supported but were taken off the table prior to the bill that was defeated on the House or in the Senate floor. But we could have lived with it. I mean, it was much better than what we had before. And as someone said earlier, we had a long-term authorization. So I think we're going to actually end up in a better place. But it's been disappointing. It's been confusing for the investors. I think all of our offices, all of us in the regional center business have spent a tremendous amount of time just explaining, where we are and that the government will honor the commitments that people made when they invested. And, so we've had this period of uncertainty, that combined, then we had the regulatory challenges that stayed, the changes that were made to the program, which added another level of confusion. So it's been, a tough many months here, but I think we're going to end up in a good place. And sometimes, what are that old saying, it's darkest before the dawn. And that's kind of where I feel we are right now.
So Bill, last question here. What the heck happened to the House and the Senate bill? I mean, the program sunsets on June 30 following a June 24 failure on the Senate floor. What happened to the two bills?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, but George is the real expert. But those two bills are still there. They were introduced into Congress. I see George nodding, which is helpful. Thank you, George. Those two bills were introduced. They're there, and they remain there. And what happens to those bills, I think, will depend on what happens in any future legislative efforts with the budget process and whatnot like that. But those bills are still there. Those co-sponsors, those sponsors of those bills are still there.
So let's jump to the next slide.
Before you jump,
Yes,
I want to say you're 100% correct, Bill. They are still there, to the point where we actually had co-sponsors added recently, and it was because of things that we had talked to certain members about, months ago, knowing that this was something that was out there that really makes an impact. But I would say in the past month, two members, one Democrat from Texas and one Republican from California, were added to the bill. So there still remains support for even that legislation that's out there, but really there remains support for the EB-5 Regional Center program, which is what we want to make sure that is known to members across the country.
Yeah, and Aaron, could I add also, I mean, one of the key points that someone touched on earlier, is that while we had strong congressional support and, a strong sponsorship group in the House and in the Senate, very powerful members of the Senate, we didn't have, although we tried to get it, we've been spending a lot of time over the last few years to bring the industry together. At one point we thought we were together, but we clearly weren't 100% unanimous with the industry. And I think that little split really is kind of what developed or led to this thing falling apart at the last minute. That has been fixed. And as was said earlier, we are unanimous as an industry. I mean, that's the only thing that wasn't there in the June period. So, this thing popped up, somebody objected to it for whatever reasons. But I mean, I think it was driven by the fact the industry really wasn't together 100%. We are today, which gives me a really great comfort in terms of getting something done here before the end of the year.
And with that, we should jump to the next slide. So that was summer 2021, a downturn, fall 2021. We've got another uptick on this roller coaster ride. And to your point, Bob, Froga, the first bullet point on this slide, development of industry consensus on legislative text was coordinated. The effort to reach that consensus was coordinated by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I'd like to take a moment to thank and recognize John Baselis, who is the Vice President of Immigration Affairs at the Chamber, who has done yeoman's work in bringing all sides together in this effort, and he continues to do so. It is commendable. So without going through the bullet points here, let me ask the panel, what happened here? Fall 2021, we were at this point 60 days at least without a program. George, we'll start with you. What happened? give us some color commentary as to what happened in the fall of 2021.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to be able to probably pinpoint exactly what year, but I would say, look, what didn't happen is we didn't stop. I think what the goal is for us always to make it known that we weren't going to allow the June 30 lapse to sit there. We were doing what we could to make sure that we could, one, still communicate to the Hill that this program needed to be reauthorized, and then obviously try to find how we can be doing that. So it really was working with the chamber and regrouping as an industry to say, okay, what steps can we be taking as a unified team to make sure that the Hill understands that we are coming together with this ask of the reauthorization and work with them and look at what we had with SA 31 and HR 2901 and the integrity reforms. And then also look, because of, as Bob mentioned too, what happened with the regulations, what also could we be addressing that would be with the investment levels and also on the, say, investment TEAs and some of the definitions that are surrounding that. What could we be doing for the actual investors and making sure that they're protected? There were a number of things that we had that we were working on prior to June 30th, but then we continued to work on even to current day. So I think that's kind of what happened and what happened, where we are right now.
A little bit more. I'm gonna tease a little bit more out of you. Sorry, I have to just to fill in the blanks here. So the industry,
yes,
got together along with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce at their behest, and the industry hammered out a consensus bill.
Yes.
Who is the industry?
So as you mentioned, so what we have is the Chamber of Commerce, IIUSA, the Rural Alliance, EB-5 IC, other groups out there that we know that have interests, and also investor groups coming together and saying, okay, what can we be doing, putting together, looking at those different pieces of legislation, whether it was from this Congress or previous Congresses, to really pull something together that would be, acceptable to all, but then also something that in a reality can be done and passed into legislation through Congress too. So that's kind of where we have been. That's the group that has come together and continues to work together in trying to get this done.
What role did the House Judiciary Committee play in this process in the fall of 2021?
House Judiciary Committee, Democratic side, the majority staff have played a critical role. They were able to take that legislation that industry put together and really digest that, go through that, and really work through some of the technical side of it, but then also be a little bit more similar to how the chamber has worked with us in the industry. The Democratic majority in the House Judiciary Committee has really trying to bridge those gaps with their counterparts on the minority side, but then also in the Senate too. So they have been taking that lead role on Capitol Hill with staff and members.
And that text is now where? I mean, they went through the House Judiciary Committee.
And it has now been presented to all other interested Capitol Hill offices. So whether it would be the minority side on the House side, and then also Republican and Democratic side in the Senate. And so that they are, once again, they're bringing that together. They're that glue right now that's pulling the pieces together. Okay.
So just to sort of round this out, and I'll open it up to the entire panel. This is really sort of a quickie kind of question, and we're going to get to another slide in this in a bit. But now that everybody's got the work product that the House of Representatives has parsed based on the industry consensus bill that was developed, what about the integrity measures? Are they there?
They are there. They are there. A lot of what was in SA 31 on the integrity measure side has been included, whether it was through industry, and then even with House Judiciary, the majority side looked at other provisions that they could be adding in from SA 31 and putting them, making sure that they are addressed. They know that for anyone, for all the members, even when we would have our meetings on the Hill, they wanted to make sure that the integrity measures or reforms were in place in the previous language, but then also in this one to make sure this could actually has a viable road for passage.
Rush, real quick question to you before we leave this slide. To the best of your knowledge, what about grandfathering? Is it in there?
Yeah, it is in the industry consensus bill. It is in what I understand went from House Judiciary to other members, as George was describing. So grandfathering is something we don't want to be in the situation we're in right now, where sunset of the program leaves tens of thousands of investors in the lurch and wondering what's going to happen. And so the grandfathering, I don't believe has any known opposition. It's part of the current text.
All right. Let's go to the next slide. I think we've actually touched on a lot of what is discussed in this next slide. I'm going to skip over a lot of the questions that I had prepared for this slide, and instead opt to maybe answer some questions at the end of this panel. But real quick, you'll note, the question here is what comes next in the winter of 2021. I think it's fair to say that now that the House and the Senate, all the relevant parties have the work product that the House Judiciary Committee developed, that there will be, we hope, knock on wood, negotiations among members, that is among senators and members of the House themselves. But it begs the question, what comes next begs the question of the appropriation schedule and other factors that are impacting the appropriation schedule. George, I'm going to come back to you, but then I'd like to hear other panelists, opinions about what they see as possibly happening in the winter of 2021 as we head towards the holidays. So start with appropriations. We've heard December 3rd, we've heard December 17th. Can you give us a picture of what actually is going on and what we can expect now that all the relevant players have the key legislative text that's been parsed and agreed to?
So yes, the federal government right now is operating to a budget that will expire on December 3rd. And so that is when the Congress needs to either do a continuing resolution at some point or pass what could be an omnibus bill to fund the government through the rest of this fiscal year. So that's where we are on those dates. That's what we are working toward. We're working with legislation and all the interested parties that we could have that language package put together and then included into what would be a December 3rd funding agreement. And that's where we are right now.
What does December 17th have to do with anything?
There have been talks about if there were to be some type of, if they aren't able to get their deal done by December 3rd, that there may be some type of a shorter clean extension to December 17th. But those right now, anything other than December 3rd is just talk. What is concrete, what is in stone right now, essentially, is that the government will run out of funding on December 3rd. They need to act. So what they do post to that is kind of some of the rumor mill, and we don't really exactly know until we get closer to that date.
Steve, real quick to you, what role will Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy play? What's your opinion? What do you see them doing in this process?
First, pardon if you hear a dog barking. Your timing was impeccable with your question. But I think it's very important to get them comfortable. Obviously, the bill that they wanted back in June, obviously did not go forward. I think progress has seemed to be made with convincing them that integrity measures that they felt were very important would be in this bill. And I think they're engaged in the negotiations, as George said, which is really important. And I think that's a good sign. That means they want to play ball and get something done. And we have to rely on the fact that they're ultimately supporters of the program, even though they obviously have some very strong views about what kind of program. So they're going to have to be part of the process as I see it. And as I think others have indicated, to those final negotiations on some of the details. So they're going to be involved. And so far, it seems their actions of engaging seem to be positive.
Agreed. I mean, I think it's worth noting that those two offices have put a lot of man hours into the development of a reauthorization effort. I don't see them walking at this point. We're grateful for what they've brought so far. Ashley, let's move to the last slide. We're next to the This has been on a lot of people's minds. And since we all agree, not that slide, one before, since we all agree that that integrity measures are in this bill, that grandfathering is going to be in this bill, what else might be in a reauthorization. I think it would be unfair of us to completely gloss over the possibilities of what might ultimately be in a reauthorization. Rush, do you want to take a crack at maybe walking through a few of these concepts and
Where's my crystal ball?
what might be there?
Well, obviously, if it's reauthorization, the issue is how long is reauthorization? I think we're probably, the Grassley-Leahy bill had 5-year reauthorization. The industry consensus bill has a 10-year reauthorization. So I think you're probably looking at a long-term reauthorization that's somewhere in that window of time. Integrity, as we talked about, that's I think a given in any bill. So we're going to see integrity. It's part of the industry consensus bill. The two items that are part of the industry consensus bill that weren't in Grassley-Leahy bill are TEA definitions and minimum investment amounts. I think everyone agrees that we need to address those in legislation. You currently have confusion as to regulations, litigation, challenging the regulations, appeals of the litigation. So I think there's confusion there. So I think you will see TEA definitions and minimum investment amounts addressed in a bill that we see. What those read, how those come out, I think there's still behind closed doors discussion and negotiation as to what that's going to look like. Grandfathering, as you said, I don't know of anyone that's against that. So I think it's a question of getting the language right so it does what we all want it to do, which is not throw us into the situation we're in now. The last two are part of the industry consensus bill. And this question is in this behind the scenes, negotiation, how will those be handled? Will they make it into a final cut? Obviously, everyone in the industry wants visa relief of some sort. I think we've heard time and time again that we're not likely to get it in terms of additional visas being allocated to the EB-5 category, but two ways to get there with different strategies. One is derivatives and one is a parole provision. Without going into the details of exactly how those would work, either one of those would be a tremendous win for the industry in terms of breathing new life into the program, opening up new opportunities for additional participants to come in and move to the United States instead of waiting in line for an untold period of time. So I think all 7 of those are part of the reauthorization bill that is in the was marked up by the House Judiciary Committee and passed to others. And we'll have to see. I think the first 4 or 5 are givens as to, I feel like they will make it. The last 2, we'll have to see. We're pushing for visa relief, and it's politically challenging, but I certainly, we all hope that can get in there.
Thank you. Let me touch very, very briefly on the last slide, and then I'd like to try to get the panel to answer some of the questions in the last few minutes that we have. So now that we've gone through the whole timeline, December 2020, all the way up to the present, and what we're expecting in the near future, what can you do? Well, obviously, contacting your representatives in the House, as well as staff on the Senate side, is critical. Any opportunity you can find to tell your story, whether you're an investor, a developer, a municipality that benefits from EB-5, chambers of commerce, trade associations, everybody that's been part of a coalition to save and create jobs. Obviously, IIUSA is on hand to help you make those contacts and tell those stories, and we encourage all of you to do so. Let me turn to a few questions that we've received and see if I can get some of the panelists' reaction. Mr. Kraft, I'd like to start with you with the first question. We got a question that says, AIIA, and we are all very grateful and aware of what AIIA is doing for investors. They were part of a panel with us earlier today, and we definitely appreciate all of their efforts. But they published a newsletter saying that December 3rd is not going to happen and that they have confidence that reauthorization will only happen in March or April. What is IIUSA's comment or stand on this? Bob, do you want to take that as IIUSA's chairman?
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're not close enough to the process. We appreciate and respect the support they've provided from an input standpoint. Certainly, we're all concerned about protecting investors. I just think they're wrong on that. We have very good feedback from all the parties we're working with that this is going to get done sooner than that. So I just think they're off. I'm not sure where that came from. None of us have heard it. I haven't heard it. I don't agree with it.
Aaron, if I could just add, I mean, we're just fortune telling at that point too, partly. I think, when we say April or March or April, there are a lot of rumors that go on there about when this CR or whatever the funding bill could be extended to. What we have to operate under is a December 3rd deadline. And that's what we know will happen, that there will be a bill on December 3rd that has to actually extend the government. We have to, no matter what it is, we have to work to make our efforts is really to get our language on that bill. And that's what we're doing. So if something happens and something gets pushed, that may happen, yes, because we've seen it before, but there does not say that we should not be focusing on a December 3rd opportunity because we think there might be one in March or April. We need to work to what's happening right now.
Thank you. Others? Let me jump to this question then, and I'll open it up to the panel, whoever buzzes in first. Does the panel, and it was addressed to the whole panel, does the panel believe that any disappointed industry stakeholders won't again split off in attempts to block passage? It's a great question. Anybody want to tackle that? I'll just call on people otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron, I'll be glad to take that. I mean, as I said earlier, we've been working very hard over the last couple of years to build industry consensus. Now, that's not to say that we got there for the June thing, but we were close. And, since then, we've spent an inordinate amount of time really, as a result of what John Bass, at least in the chamber, volunteered to do, to bring everybody together to get input from all industry groups to then be put into a bill. And there has been dialogue with those groups. I feel really good about the cooperative spirit that we've had with all groups. And AILA wasn't mentioned earlier. They've been very involved also. So we have everybody lined up right now. Could somebody object? Sure. But I think unlike the unanimous consent attempt that was made, this is different. This is going to be riding on a must-spend bill. And even if there were some objections or maybe some senators and representatives that don't support it, it's not going to stop it. So it's a totally different situation right now.
I think we have
Aaron.
Yeah.
I would add, the situation's a little bit different when there have been splits in the past. There was an authorized program that was just trying to be reauthorized in one way or the other, either with changes or a clean. Everybody involved in this industry is involved in this industry and, stands to benefit by this program continuing. And increasingly, the longer the period of time that it's not authorized, could suffer real damage. And that goes across the whole board of, industry stakeholders. And so I think while that could certainly happen, the concern that was raised, the dynamics now really make it, I don't want to put this in too bad a light, really a very desperate situation to get this done now because everybody's affected by the program not being reauthorized. So I think the dynamics speak to that being less likely to happen this time.
I think we are just about out of time. I am going to end the panel by answering a question that just popped up at the last moment. Are IIUSA and EB-5 IC now on the same page regarding terms? Yes. And I'd like to give a shout out actually to our colleagues across the EB-5 ecosystem, investors, all elements and stakeholders who have realized what Steve just articulated, who know the story that began back in 2020 and has come all the way up to right now. And the bill that was provided to the House and the Senate does in fact reflect consensus between EB-5 IC and IIUSA. IIUSA has even drafted a letter to Senator Graham saying as much. What happens now is clearly up to Senate offices and their ability to work together with the industry and with the House offices to make final determinations on policy. We are obviously there to be supportive to them in those conversations, and we look forward to helping them bring this across the finish line, which I believe, Abteen, to answer your question, will we have an EB-5 reauthorization? Yes, we most definitely will. So that's where we are. That's where we've been, and that's where we're going. I appreciate everybody who's been on this call. We're just about a minute or so over time. And so, Ashley, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you to all of our panelists. I know everyone's been really looking forward to this discussion, and hopefully all of our attendees found this to be informative and you feel a little bit more up to date on what has been going on over the last several months, and feeling optimistic about the future of the program. That finishes this panel for right now. We have another panel this afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern on direct EB-5. So make sure to tune back in at the top of the hour for 2 p.m. Eastern. And thank you again for attending. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Ashley.